less than a minute actually. Welcome everyone to the second Horizon 3 Biotech Investing webinar for 2021, hosted by Horizon 3 Biotech and sponsored and conducted by FB Rice and Monsoon Communications. This webinar is being recorded. And before we begin, the disclaimer: the purpose of this presentation is not to give financial product advice. If any financial product advice is given in the presentation, the standard disclaimers, that it is general advice only, apply. Today, we're very fortunate to have two experienced and respected leaders in biotech investment, in Tony Locantro, who joins us from Perth. Thank you for getting up early, Tony. And Sue McLean, who joins us here in Melbourne. I'll introduce you to Tony first. Tony joined Alto Capital as an investment manager in 2017. Tony's developed extensive knowledge and experience since joining the financial services industry in 1998, in particular developing a niche in identifying high growth investment opportunities in the resource, biotech and industrial sectors. As such, he's advised on numerous successful IPO and pre-IPO capital raisings in the Australian market. Tony's a major contributor to the financial media and can be seen regularly on Bulls, Bears and Brokers. I'm going to ask you about that later, Tony. Sue McLean needs no introduction to this sector. However, for the one or two people who have not had the pleasure of dealing with Sue thus far, Sue has more than 30 years' experience as a pharmaceutical, biotechnology and medical technology executive, having held roles in corporate, medical, commercial and business development. Who's also served as CEO and board member of several ASX and NASDAQ listed companies in the pharmaceutical sector. Sue is the chair of MTP Connect and Atara Life Sciences and Tali Digital. Sue is also a non-executive director of Parla Pharma, Oventus Medical and Planet Innovation. Sue has also been appointed to several academic and government advisory committees, including the CSIRO Health and Biosecurity Advisory Committee, the Prime Minister's Digital Experts Advisory Committee, and DMTC's Medical Countermeasures and various COVID-19 task forces. In 2019, Sue was awarded the prestigious Oz Biotech and Johnson & Johnson Innovation Industry Leadership Award in recognition of her outstanding contribution to the MTP sector. If you don't know Sue, get to know Sue. Today, we'll be discussing COVID biotech sector impacts, government programs, and a WA perspective on investing in the biotech sector. Both Sue and Tony will be more than happy to take your questions later. So please use the Q&A function, I think it's at the bottom of our Zoom screen, anytime from now, and we will address as many of those as possible after we answer the pre-submitted questions that people have provided upon registration. First, the session called Matt on the Horizon, where I comment on some of the important developments impacting our sector and thus investment objectives. Biotech announced a second collaboration with Merck Sharp and Dohme to explore the combination of Merck's Keytruda with its own immunotherapy, IMP321. The phase 2b study will involve 160 patients with head and neck cancer as a first-line therapy, with half of the patients to be given Keytruda alone compared to Keytruda in combination with IMP321. Last week, Biotech shares spiked after Bristol Myers Squibb announcement that a drug similar to Immutep's lead candidate had succeeded in fighting cancer in a 714 patient study. Patients treated with the BMS anti-LAG-3 monoclonal antibody, relatlimab, in conjunction with BMS's immunotherapy Opdivo, had better progression-free survival than patients treated with Opdivo alone. So augurs well for Biotech. Thermo Fisher Scientific is rolling out a new device designed to monitor rooms for airborne viruses, including SARS-CoV-2. And in the same vein, Australian private company Grayscan has also announced the ability to detect SARS-CoV-2 from a breath test in 3 minutes. Ver Biotechnology and GlaxoSmithKline have asked the FDA for emergency use authorization for their coronavirus fighting dual action antibody. The duo is seeking an emergency OK for the treatment of adults and adolescents aged 12 and older with mild to moderate COVID-19 who are at risk of dying from or needing hospitalisation. My old stomping ground, Johnson & Johnson Vision, has received its first global approval for a contact lens infused with an antihistamine designed to help curb the itchiness that comes with eye allergies. Japan gave the green light to the company's AccuView TheraVision lens with ketoifen daily disposable contact lens that contains the same active ingredient used in eye drops to offer relief from pollen, ragweed, and grass or animal hair and dander. According to J&J, 8 out of 10 regular contact lens wearers said they feel frustrated when allergy season comes along with itchiness interfering with their vision. On the heel of its rapid development of a COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer will attempt to use the same gene-based technology to advance other vaccines against a host of diseases, including flu, novel vaccines against CMV, cytomegalovirus, and even go into RSV. Also, Moderna says it has 9 vaccines in various stages of development, including 5 immuno-oncology treatments, 4 for rare diseases, and 2 each for cardiovascular and autoimmune diseases. Insulet Corp announced data from its first pivotal study showing that its tubeless wearable insulin delivery system could continuously adapt to changes in glucose levels and help provide more time in healthy blood sugar range for adults and children with type 1 diabetes. The upcoming Omnipod 5 system, currently under review by the FDA, includes a waterproof closed-loop insulin pump, attaches to the skin of a person's back and communicates directly with a Dexcom continuous glucose monitor with a smartphone app. Can be used to deliver boluses when needed. And not to be negative Nelly, but on a final note, a major pharma scandal in France has culminated in a ruling against domestic firm Servier for its role in the hundreds of deaths caused by weight loss drug Mediator. I didn't know about this. In a landmark ruling wrapping up decades of controversy around the amphetamine-derived drug, a Paris court found Servier guilty of aggravated fraud and involuntary manslaughter for marketing Mediator. A pretty sobering thought. So now to our panelists. Sue, can I start with you, please? MTP Connect is a not-for-profit organisation aiming to accelerate the rate of growth of the medical technologies, biotechnologies and pharmaceutical sector to increase commercialisation, collaboration and establish Australia as an Asia-Pacific hub for MTP companies. How's your team tracking and what impact has COVID had on your members' deliverables?
Sure, thanks, Matt, and I really appreciate the opportunity today to present. Firstly, my team, we were tracking COVID pretty carefully, and in fact, long before a lot of other companies put their teams on work from home, we actually made the call to do that. We had a number of our team members who were either immunocompromised or had immunocompromised, family members. And so we fairly quickly, given I guess that we had some exposure through some of the task forces, moved to have our team safely at home and working productively. And they have continued to work productively during that time. And in fact, we've expanded that team as we've secured additional programs. You may be aware that MTP Connect's an industry-led, not-for-profit organisation, but we are largely funded by the federal government. And, we deploy about $162 million into the sector across 5 programs and about 106 projects. And we continue to invest in the sector and, in fact, accelerated some of that investment over this time. For those, since May, the sector has begun its recovery, and we've been tracking that fairly carefully. We've published a number of reports on the sector and the COVID impact. So we had the pandemic slump as case numbers reduced and restrictions across most of Australia began to ease, enabling the resumption of many activities across the sector, including clinical trials, preclinical R&D activity and elective surgery. However, the sector does continue to face challenges. The second wave of infections sent Melbourne into a pretty strict lockdown in August, and that created challenges for organisations, including our own, that were either based in or dependent on Victoria for revenue. Nationally, we saw supply chain challenges, and they have persisted as international borders have remained closed, and consequently, air freight capacity availability for import and export of goods has remained limited and costly for the sector. The closure of international borders has also put universities under enormous financial pressure, with an estimated $2 billion lost in revenue from international student fees, and that resulted in substantial job losses, and in many cases, the slowing down or stopping of quite important research activities. Pre-revenue companies and universities continue to be ineligible for JobKeeper, and so face the prospect of having to cut more jobs in the near term to maintain financial viability. And in many of my companies, the board took pay cuts and tried to make sure that we could navigate it without having to lose our critical staff members. Despite the challenges, the sector itself has played a key role in the response to the pandemic. We had MTP sector organisations have worked incredibly closely with federal, state and territory governments and the industry and the research sector to develop local manufacturing capabilities, and that includes everything from essential medical equipment like ventilators and supplies such as personal protection equipment, tests and test kits, and also essential medicines. And while battling severe revenue contraction, universities have stepped up to maintain, vital health and medical research efforts. And we've seen a lot of those university staff actually deployed into our incident rooms around the country, really providing support for government as they've had to coordinate these efforts. Of the COVID-19 vaccine assets in clinical trial, obviously Australia was a forefront of that innovation, and we saw the University of Queensland work, and although that one did not progress, I know Paul Young has got another target there that's looking very promising. We also saw the work that the University of Melbourne and the Doherty and others did, and of course we've got the extraordinary effort of CSL and partnering with AstraZeneca to actually create the vaccine that's rolling out across Australia now, and a number of other players. Service providers such as Nucleus Network, they commenced clinical trials for several global vaccine candidates, and they demonstrated Australia's capability in conducting high quality clinical trials even under extremely trying circumstances. We were asked to deploy some money into the sector as well, and through our biomedical translation bridge program, we specifically targeted COVID-19 projects. We awarded $4.1 million to 5 projects, and the expectation was that they would have an impact within 12 months. They covered things like vaccine development, a new treatment for respiratory complications, a preventative nasal spray developed for an approval antiviral, a rapid response test to predict severity of disease progression, and a ventilator hood to better care for patients and protect healthcare staff. And you will have seen recently Star Pharma's news where its product, its antiviral nasal spray that we supported, has actually been launched in the UK this week via the large pharmacy chain Lloyd's Pharmacy. We also saw groups like Dimerix, as part of 2 different investigation-led phase 3 studies for patients with respiratory complications. On the policy front, flexible regulatory and reimbursement pathways were created to enable rapid innovation and adoption of technologies. Industry and the research sector work collaboratively with government to develop solutions to urgent, complex issues such as rapid scale-up of diagnostic testing and supply of essential medical equipments and components. And myself and many of my members of my team sat on those task forces right across Australia. Australia is still in the midst of its most significant recession since the 1930s. The journey to recovery will take time, and the MTP sector faces a number of key challenges in the near term. While COVID has had devastating health and economic impacts in Australia and around the world, it has also driven innovation, the adoption of new technologies and behavioural change at an unprecedented rate. And we've seen that pivot to digital with e-prescriptions and telemedicine. And many of these changes will persist and, in my view, present significant opportunities for a post-pandemic growth for this sector as we look to this sector for a tech bounce. I might stop there, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. That's great. So during 2020 and subsequently, what differences in strategies have you seen employed by our industry to handle or capitalise, because the word pivot always comes up, on the pandemic's impact on our sector?
Sure. So the pandemic has absolutely driven innovation and made us really think strategically about what we're doing and where we're putting our funds. We've seen the adoption of new technologies, and we've also seen behavioural change at an unprecedented rate. Patients, governments, the sector participants and healthcare providers have all had to adapt and, in doing so, have pushed the boundaries and increased the pace of change. Many of these changes will persist and create a new baseline, in my view, for the ongoing innovation will occur. Properly harnessed, these rapid changes present, I think, exciting opportunities for our sector to deliver better outcomes for patients and strengthen the global position and reputation of our sector, including adding significant shareholder value. There are 6 key trends that I believe have emerged during the pandemic and present opportunities for post-pandemic growth. So firstly, and I mentioned it before, the adoption of accelerated adoption of telehealth. We've seen the growth in and delivery of medical supplies and medicines to patients. We've got more investment in local manufacturing, sovereign capability, supply chain resilience, and also the shoring up of some of those security of some of those more international supply chains. We've seen improved use of artificial intelligence, and of course we've been using AI in a lot of our tracking and tracing efforts right across, but also some of the new technologies utilise AI. We've seen an increased digitalisation of clinical trials. Even in one of my companies, Anatara, we had to pivot to a fully virtual trial, and that was something a number of companies had to do, and that was something that was not common 12 months ago and is now much more common. And we've seen the better use of robotics. So some of these trends have experienced a step change, delivering outcomes in 3 months that would have, normally taken us many years. And at the same time, other innovations have found broader application in the pandemic response, and there has been an increased appreciation for their relevance and value, and that I think is going to hold us in good stead. For example, virtual consultations, remote monitoring have been adopted rapidly by policymakers, care providers and patients during the pandemic, but we need to do more. There is an opportunity for the sector to leverage this step change and continue developing new telehealth and remote monitoring products and services, digital therapeutics to provide benefits for patients in remote areas and those that have accessibility challenges. Another key trend to emerge in response to the lockdown has been the rapid growth in home deliveries of medical supplies and medicines to patients by services such as MedAdvisor and Uber Eats even. And I think there are opportunities for the sector to build new services and adapt their supply chains to provide better convenience for patients. There's also an opportunity, and we're seeing a lot of conversation about this right now, to leverage the domestic manufacturing capability that has come to the fore during the pandemic. So we've seen the CSL AstraZeneca, but many may not be aware that we're also evaluating whether or not we could create an mRNA manufacturing capability ecosystem here in Australia, utilising many of the companies that already exist and the alliances that they are already creating with our research groups. And I expect you'll see more coming out on that. I've sat on an advisory committee as we've navigated some of those challenges. I think you will see a continued focus on sovereign capability and supply chain resilience. And I think you're going to see more programs come from government that will help guard against trade, freight and supply chain restrictions. And I think there's going to be a bit more focus on future preparedness and what we can learn from this pandemic and what we need to. We did a lot of things right, but there's always learnings and we could have done some things better. And so I think we have to take those learnings and feed that into the system. I think the increased use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, the value of big data and analytics and robotics is a trend that's critical to maintain. And I think that you're going to see much more focus from government as an exemplar for digital, much more support for digital coming out of government. And, I'm excited about some of those opportunities. we can't forget, we all work through this pandemic every day. I can honestly say I have never worked harder in my entire life. The MTP sector is playing a vital role in Australia's recovery. It's driving future economic growth and ensuring Australia is better prepared to deal with future pandemics. I think we've taught a whole lot of people about the value of our sector and the amazing jobs that you can have in our sector, and also the value that can be derived for shareholders who invest in this sector. And I'm hoping that we continue to do this good work, but in fact scale it even further and make sure that we take every opportunity, don't waste a good pandemic. And I think we have an opportunity to really build Australia's MTP sector.
Thanks for that, Sue. Your response, it does beg the question, did Uber Eats really set up a drug delivery, or are they considering food a vital part of people's medication?
There were some patients who didn't have access, and their local pharmacies had some coordinated efforts where they were able to ensure that those patients got their appropriate medicines when they needed them.
Very good. Oh, that's excellent. Now, Tony, Alto Capital is a full-service investment and corporate advisory firm. You assist businesses looking to raise capital, including early stage and venture capital. Alto is an advisor to a number of ASX-listed companies. Can you please give some examples of ASX healthcare companies that you've assisted?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My major biotech deal was when Dr. Ian Dixon phoned me. He had a vision on exosomes, and he said, Tony, I need $1 million, and then I'm going to need another $20 million. So Alto Capital took on the role of floating Exofarm. So we raised $8 million. There was another 2 capital raisings, and we just did a large chunk of the 24-cent raising. The stock did quite well. It peaked around 95 cents. And that was largely driven by, in Israel, they delivered a cancer drug that actually assisted 29 out of 30 patients with COVID. So I worked on that deal. That floating Exofarm led to Alto Capital floating another company called Narada. We were the main broker to that issue. And I've just been involved in an $11 million capital raising at 26 cents per CDI. Narada's involved in a cholesterol inhibitor designed to hopefully reduce LDL cholesterol. The mice studies have been most promising. Narada's other project is to do with traumatic brain injury, and that's rather topical at the moment based on the concussion in sports stars and those that have shown after death CTE. So these are 2 very exciting programs. All the results thus far, even though they're preclinical, have been quite attractive. So Alto Capital, we've floated, as I said, both Narada and Exofarm. I also took on a major role with proteomics, which has the ProMarker D test in diabetics that detects chronic kidney disease around 4 years before it happens. That has been proven. So that's just a rollout story now. And they also are working on a test for endometriosis, which affects 1 in 9 women. And that's quite a hideous disease. And so they have that in their pipeline as well. So I undertook 2 major capital raisings for proteomics at 20 cents, 28 cents, and they recently peaked at $1.48. And I think now, since the product's proven, it's pretty much a sales exercise. I actually, last week, I went to their 20-year party celebration in Perth, and it went back 20 years where Richard Lipscomb said, myself and my partner, we put a $2 coin on the table and we formed Proteomics. They also have a lab in Netherlands where they test the proteins for the A2 milk company. So I see significant growth in those 3 stocks. I've also raised money for Adalta, which has AD214. They also have an alliance with GE Healthcare, and Adalta are looking at treating idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis based on the antibody of a shark, and they're currently in the phase 1 aspect of that trial, and so far there's been no major issues with dosing. So I look at these companies from a very early stage. seed into the IPO, on-market buying support, and capital raisings.
Great, Tony. Thank you very much. And so the companies that you look at, you look across mining and resources, biotechnology, agriculture, healthcare. Specifically in the biotech and healthcare sectors, what do you look for when taking on these clients?
To me, it's all about risk reward. I make no apologies for dealing entirely in small cap stocks. I've been doing it for 23 years. What I do is get to know management and get to know the risk rewards of investing in a biotech company. And often it's the lack of bad news that allows these companies to progress through preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, and hopefully commercialization. So what I do for my clients, I will not recommend a stock that I don't think has 3, 4, 5 times and beyond upside potential. And that's all I focus on. I'm terrible at chasing stocks, or I feel as though I'm selling out buying existing biotech companies with market caps 500 and $1 billion plus. I'm here to pretty much provide the risk reward that clients are looking for, and that in that way, I've been on the panel at the BioShares conference in Queenstown. I try and get to face-to-face management. I have a lot of company meetings, and my role, Matt, is to provide my clients with the best odds in a very difficult space.
Tony, a long time ago, someone told me that a good client advisor has a 52% success rate. How are you tracking?
A lot better than that. That's rubbish. Look, we had a baseline last year of 130%, 460% off the COVID lows. Not every client had the money or the courage to buy at the lows. Oh, look, honestly, I'd say I'm striking at about 80. But that involves exploration, junior exploration companies. It involves companies that grow through acquisition. I've raised a lot of money. One of my major raisings in the past was Pharmost, which I raised at 2.5 cents. That peaked at 27. So it's all about taking profits all the way up for my clients and redeploying that capital. We also rode Dimerics from 9, 10. I raised the money at 12, and I think that peaked in the high 70s before the subsequent results disappointed. But I'd taken the risk reward approach all the way up, and clients still did quite well out of it. But we're cognizant of the risks of trial results. There was quite large expectation that would succeed. It probably succeeded in the company's eyes, but the market absolutely punished the stock. So look, I know about 20 companies intimately. I'll go through the financial review with a highlighter and just try and work out what I missed.
Well, congratulations on 80%. I think your phone's going to be ringing hot now from this audience.
That's right. You go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want, so another question for you. You're at the forefront of government support for biotech. I wonder if you could tell us which programs are getting the best traction and which might our audience be less aware of that you can draw our attention to.
Yeah, so I think if companies are wanting to find out how to navigate the grant landscape, they need to make sure that they're signed up to Grant Connect. They should also touch base with their MTP Connect colleague in each state. We don't charge anything for assisting those companies. They can have a conversation, and those guys can work with those companies to identify the best grant programs that might be available for them. We also provide quite a lot of support to make sure that when that grant application goes in, that it's got a high chance of success. And we do that by surrounding those companies with experts in the field for whatever stage of development that they're at, that they might, they need to design the killer experiment, or they need some regulatory advice, or, they don't have a clear market access strategy. And so we can actually help them navigate some of that, and so I would encourage companies to do that. There's about 130 programs nationally at state and federal level, and so it is difficult to navigate those. And that's why I'm suggesting it is worthwhile reaching out to some of those people who can help you at no cost. And they've been very successful in helping small companies navigate that. So from my perspective, there are those sorts of programs. I would point you to the MTP Connect website as well. We've got 5 active programs. We're expecting that we'll have others. As I mentioned, 162 million going into the sector across 106 different projects. And I expect that we will continue that work.
That's brilliant. And I had no idea that there were so many different programs. And it makes me feel as if any company and any executive that's listening today, if they haven't connected with MTP Connect by now, they should, because they'll get a read as to what they might be to benefit from.
And a lot of small companies, Matt, I'll say, don't know how to navigate big organisations like the TGA or CSIRO, or even the large medical research institutes or universities. And you know, a lot of those universities are putting in programs like SME Assist with TGA, so that companies can have someone handhold them a little bit as they navigate those big organisations. The universities are looking at similar things, and so you know, I would certainly encourage those SMEs to think about those sorts of collaborations. And I think you're going to see more government focused and incentives on that research industry collaboration and better movement of industry into research and research into industry, like we see in so many other jurisdictions around the world. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, Tony, which biotech healthcare stocks do you have in your pipeline, or you know, are you currently recommending, and why? You know, and it's okay, you can talk your own book.
Yeah, I think Adalta came back from 26.5 cents. That's around 16.5. I think they have a massive future. Tim Oldham's very impressive, so we're buying that. We're continuing to accumulate Exopharm on the dips. It's come back from 95, currently around 67. I'm also, even though we just did the capital raise for Narada, I still think that's fantastic value around 30 cents. And clients that don't have a 708, I think that's good buying around 30 cents. Proteomics has shot the lights out, so to speak. So we're continuing to hold that stock. But they are my core biotechs. However, I've recently been involved in the Chimeric Therapeutics IPO with Paul Hopper. That's a CAR T cancer therapy based on the synthesized toxin of a scorpion. They're currently in phase 1 trials. So we are it's pretty much one of the first stocks I put clients in, anywhere around 30 cents. I've had a number of Zooms with Paul Hopper and Jennifer Chow. I think Paul has the capacity with Chimeric to build a serious biotech company, and that's hence why we're pretty much buying as much stock as we can.
Fantastic. Now, Tony, in your intro, I mentioned Bulls, Bears and Brokers. I've not seen it. Do they have a biotech session? And if so, should we Easterners tune into it?
I do a lot of media. That's with Proactive Investors. It was called Bulls, Bears and Brokers. Now it's just a fortnightly update. I do small caps per fortnight. So I talk about mining and biotech stocks. I do a live show every month with Elio D'Amato, which is a live show where mums and dads ring in or they text through questions. So that's once a month. And also about once every 4 to 6 weeks, I do a live show with Martin North, who's one of the preeminent property and economy experts in the country. So I do that as well. And I also do recorded interviews. So fairly big fish in a small pond with the media. But you know, most of Australia are focused on Married at First Sight, and they don't really care if they're going to lose their house or their investments. So, you know, I'm as popular as a pimple on prom night, but I just think this is a great space where you can make a lot of money, and that's what I'm trying to do for clients by getting involved in these great biotech companies at an early stage.
All right, thank you. That's brilliant. Now, we had some additional questions from the audience when they registered. One was directly to you, Tony, but I think you've answered it. It was Narada and all the stocks that you've mentioned. There's a couple here that I think are for Sue. Peter asks, why isn't there more collaboration between small cap biotechs and the large medical institutes? Is commercialisation a priority?
I think that's a really interesting question. When we're prosecuting this right now in a whole lot of think tanks around the country, as people probably know, the vast majority of funding into universities and medical research institutes comes from the government and from students. It does not come from industry. In fact, the OECD average is about 10%, and Australia tracks somewhere at about 5%. So by no means is industry actively engaging effectively with our research organisations. And part of that is that industry is very much investing in the maths focused subjects, while the universities are obviously doing a much diverse offering. Now, our sector does slightly better in that if you are going to commercialise a medicine or a medical device, you're thinking global from day one. And you know that you're going to have to do a number of collaborations right around the world in order to, secure the $2 billion and do the 12 years of work that you need to do to bring, for example, a new pharmaceutical to market. So I think that the structure is slightly wrong. The other thing I think we have a problem with is there's a funny feedback loop, which is, I guess, perceived in universities where it is actually real in industry, in that it's all very well having a whole lot of academic push for the best new idea, but unless there's commercial pull and alignment of both parties on what's the problem they're going to try and solve, and whether or not the solution being put forward really, has a clear value proposition and is competitive in the global market space. And we need to spend a great deal more time, I think, on that problem definition, and we need to spend more time at better understanding the offerings of our research organisations and research understanding the things that industry is good at. And we need to have better systems in place to drive that translation and commercialisation of Australian research, because we do world-class research in this country. But we have a poor record of translation and commercialisation. And even if you take the most successful university, UniQuest, for example, with Queensland University, you take out one or two of those key projects, e.g. Gardasil, and it falls to a very small number fairly quickly. And we need to be much more effective at making sure that we unlock that research and truly translate it and commercialise it. We're having a conversation about the creation of research translators as a term, so either embedded in industry or in research institutions that really can manage that nexus between research and industry. And I think that's going to be a conversation that we continue to do, and hopefully see some incentives in place and some policy initiatives to drive better collaboration.
Thank you, Sue. Rachel asks, and you may have already answered this, Sue, but you can add to this. You may have answered it in your answers previously. Many of the government grants are for matched funding. Tips, please, for companies seeking private funding to enable them to access grants. Well, your answer may be, contact MTP Connect, but you may want to add to that.
Sure, I will. So thanks for the question. I think it is a challenge for SMEs to do this, but I think if you've got a clear value proposition, you've got the right team, the right IP and technology and the right plan, then you shouldn't have too much trouble finding investment capital. The idea is to then make that investment capital go as far as it possibly can. And I don't think you should ever run a company based on just the grants you can get. I think you need to have a clear value proposition and an investable story independent of grants. Grants are good because they're non-dilute funding. And I think a lot of people forget that they actually, can match Commonwealth money with, in some cases, state money, in some cases with money from CSIRO, and also obviously venture capital. So I think it is about having a really robust story, the right team and the right technology, going out and pitching that, and then where you can secure non-dilute grant funding, but don't be reliant on it. I think we, as an industry, need to make sure that our companies can stand on their own 2 feet, and that we get a return on investment for investors.
Yeah. And we've got a question from the audience, probably for you, Tony, because you've mentioned the company. It's probably submitted by Ann Dixon, this question. Just wondering, the thoughts regarding EV medicines, in particular the research and ongoing clinical trials by Exopharm and the positive outcomes thus far?
Yeah, I think it stems from the LEAP technology of purifying exosomes, and that they were looking at wound healing. And I think this Israeli COVID issue delivering the cancer drug via exosomes is huge. And there's only two purely exosome companies listed in the world. So Exopharm was tracking Kodiak Biosciences share price initially. Some of that excitement has worn off. But I think I go to Twitter for a lot of my research. If you put exosomes into Twitter, you'll come up with all the developments, and that extends from cancer to eye diseases. But this is new medicine. I think Ian Dixon's a bit of a pioneer in the industry, so this could take quite some time to evolve as well. So I think the field's very, very exciting. Exopharm have built a staff now of over 40 people, and they have recruited people that have experience in CSL and manufacturing. So it's a huge team. There's probably going to be a lot of news flow as well. But I just think the market's going to struggle to value something that's entirely new. And I'm hoping one day that the market overvalues the company, because that's what some of these companies get billion-dollar valuations and don't have an inch of revenue. So extremely exciting. But what I've learned through listing Exopharm is I rate Ian Dixon as a commercial genius, which is very rare in the industry. And he hasn't paid me to say that either.
And my friends at FB Rights and Monsoon tell me it wasn't Ian, it was Brian that submitted that question. So apologies, Ian. Now this next question sounds like it's me submitting it, and I'm sure the team will let me know who actually did. Why is venture capital so limited in Australia, and there are so few repeat institutional investors? I'll have a crack at that first, and then one of you might like to also mention it or answer it. The early stage of life science venture capital was very patchy. The success rate was very, very patchy. And in the time that I've been marketing funds to investors, particularly institutional investors and superannuation funds, they've got the capacity to invest anywhere. So they look at seasoned funds in the Northern Hemisphere that have got onto their 6th, 7th fund that's been successful, and so they are looking for a consistent track record. And what I can tell you is that Horizon 3 Biotech is currently marketing a fund, but we are looking at later stage biotechnology. So, apologies to all those companies we've looked at and we've said you're too early, but we think by investing in later stage that it actually de-risks. Sue or Tony, did you want to have a crack at that answer?
I'll have a crack.
Thank you.
I just think Australian investors really can't provide the valuations that occur in the US. We've seen the likes of Megan Baldwin from Opthia raise significant funds in the US. And I think some of my biotechs would be looking for comparable capital raisings over time. Our small cap biotech sector is riddled now with day traders, pip traders, and Twitter-driven trading patterns. And I think a lot of these stocks, I called it the dick with phase. During announcement or phase 1, phase 2 trials, people just buy and sell out of boredom, or try and buy at 16 cents and sell at 17 cents. So Australia still has that penny crap stock culture, unfortunately. And a lot of my stocks really need to break that penny stock range to attract the larger investors. And I know that both Exopharm and Narada have presented, and I think they have started to attract institutional investors. And proteomics also is attracting overseas investors. I think we've had success in a stock called Renalytics. And overseas investors can look at the market cap of a NASDAQ stock and compare it to Australia. And there's lots of blue sky ahead in the Australian sector. But as I said before, it's just dominated by gamblers at the moment. And that, I think, keeps the more successful, larger institutions away.
I guess I might add to that, Matt, if I can, I mean, I think we actually have some good VCs in Australia. We just don't have the depth or the amount of money and the incentive structures in place to make sure that that investment is made here at scale. And we see a lot of our companies, unfortunately, head overseas or list too early when they're really programs rather than companies. And we have to get better than that. But I think, you know, for me, it's about showing that we can get a good return on investment, that we can kill the bad projects very early and deploy those funds into those projects with a higher chance of success. So do fewer, but do them better, and, you know, turn some of those small companies into medium-sized companies and show that we can get a true return on investment.
I agree with both of your sentiments. Now, the last question, you're not going to believe it, Tony. It's a free plug. Tony, how can we contact you? So come on, give me your email, give me your mobile number.
I'm drowning in new clients at the moment, and I want to. Oh, look. A lot of people are now sending me sob stories. Look, I've got capacity. Anyone who's keen to come on board in Biotech, and I'll also introduce you to some junior exploration companies looking for mines. Tony at altocapital.com.au, and I'll get in touch after Easter.
All right, guys, we'll have to wind it up now. The next webinar will be the Thursday, the 6th of May at 10:30 a.m, same time. Thanks to the audience. Your feedback and suggestions and questions were brilliant. Thanks to FB Rice and Monsoon Communications for sponsoring and hosting the webinar. And finally, thank you to Sue and Tony for joining us. Much appreciated. And we'll see you all again on the 6th. Thanks very much. And have a happy and safe Easter.
You too.
Cheers.